quiet cloisters of Louviers, the air smelled faintly of candle wax and damp stone. A young nun, her voice trembling but oddly serene, whispered to the confessor that she had found her perfect groom. He was not a man of God. He was not a man at all. She said, it was Satan himself. The words should have been laughed off as madness, but they weren't. They spread through the convent like smoke from a hidden fire, and with every retelling, they grew sharper, darker, until no one could tell where the lie ended and the truth began. The royal court would hear of it, and when kings take notice of demons, the outcome is never mercy. The tale was more than a scandal. It was a sickness that seeped into stone walls, into whispered prayers, into the fragile minds of women locked away from the world. What began as one confession would spiral into shrieking visions, accusations of black masses, and the slow unraveling of a holy house. By the time the investigation began, the question was no longer whether the devil had entered Louviers, but how many of its walls he had already claimed. The priests came with their crosses, the magistrates with their warrants, and the air itself turned heavier. Somewhere inside, Madeleine Bavant waited. Her name already cursed by tongues she could not silence. The candles still burned in the chapel that night, their flames bending in the draught. And if you stood in the dark, just beyond the choir stalls, you might swear you heard her voice again, not in prayer, but in the vow she could never take back. And so, we step inside Louviers. The convent of Louviers was meant to be a fortress of silence. Prayers whispered at dawn, sandals brushing over cold stone, faces bowed so low they could barely see the light filtering through stained glass. Yet silence can be a dangerous thing, because when it cracks, it does not break softly. It shatters. At first, it was nothing more than a murmur in the corridors. Sisters speaking in half sentences, cutting their words short the moment another passed by. The youngest novices grew pale without knowing why, their hands trembling as they turned the pages of their prayer books. In the village beyond the gates, people spoke of strange unease inside the convent, though no one could say what it truly was. Holiness is fragile. Once it splinters, the darkness finds a way in. Madeleine Bavant was not yet infamous. She was young, devout, and by all outward signs, obedient. But her eyes lingered too long in the shadows. She began to speak of dreams, dreams that clung to her waking hours, visions that twisted the sacred into something foul. At first, only one or two heard her whispers. Then, somehow, the entire convent seemed to lean in, listening. The quiet prayers in the chapel no longer felt pure. They felt watched. Servants crossed themselves twice when they entered certain rooms. Priests lowered their voices as they walked the halls. Some believed the devil had slipped through the gates. Others feared he had been welcomed in. Life went on as if nothing had changed. Bells still marked the hours. Hymns still rose to the rafters. But beneath that rhythm, the air grew heavier, as if each breath carried a secret no one dared to confess. Madeleine's presence became a weight in the room, an unspoken center of gravity pulling every gaze toward her. Winter crept over Normandy, and with it came the first signs that the whispers were no longer enough. Something in Louviers was preparing to reveal itself, and when it did, it would drag the entire convent into a darkness they could never escape. They said her vows had bound her to God, but Madeleine Bavant claimed she had been led to another altar, one hidden from the light. one drenched in the scent of burning wax, and something far worse. It was there, she said, that she was wed to Satan himself. The telling was never the same twice. In some versions, she spoke of a figure cloaked in black, whose face shifted like smoke when she tried to see it clearly. In others, she swore she could feel the weight of a ring sliding onto her finger, cold as iron and hot as sin all at once. There were no witnesses who dared speak, yet somehow the story spread as if it had been shouted from the pulpit. Madeleine described hands guiding her through the ritual, hands she recognized. The voice reciting oaths was not the devil's, but that of a man she had once called father in faith. The words promised loyalty, body and soul, but not to heaven. If her confession was true, then evil had not invaded Louviers from outside. It had been grown there, like a seed in the soil of the sacred. Each retelling carried more detail and more fear. Some sisters claimed they had seen black shapes at the edge of candlelight, curling like ink in water. Others swore they had heard the chant of a mass, but in a tongue no priest would dare use. For the first time, the name of the devil was spoken aloud in the convent, and the walls seemed to hold the sound. The village beyond Louviers began to change. People crossed themselves when they passed the gates. Parents pulled their children closer. The priest from the nearest parish visited less often, and when he did, he kept his eyes low. The convent was becoming a place you did not approach without need, and soon, a place you did not leave without suspicion. And through it all, Madeleine's story deepened like a wound left open. Whether truth, madness, or something between, it was beginning to infect others. The walls that once heard too much would soon hear screams, and once the first voice broke, more would follow. If you think a single confession can be contained, wait until you hear what happens when an entire convent begins to speak at once. The first scream shattered the morning prayers. It cut through the chapel like a blade, leaving every voice frozen mid-hymn. One of the younger nuns had fallen to the floor, her body twisting as if pulled by invisible chains. Her mouth opened wide, but the words spilling out were not French, nor Latin, nor any tongue the sisters recognized. It was a sound that felt older than the stones beneath them. They rushed to her side, crossing themselves, murmuring prayers, but she only thrashed harder. Her eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, her nails scraping the flagstones. Then, as quickly as it began, she went still and smiled. The sight chilled even the eldest among them. That day, it did not end with her. Another sister collapsed at supper, convulsing so violently the bench tipped and shattered. A third woke screaming in the middle of the night, claiming a black figure had stood over her bed. By the week's end, half the convent spoke of strange visitations, each story darker than the last. Madness spreads like fire. All it needs is a single spark, and the rest will burn whether it's real or not. The walls that once guarded their secrets now seemed to amplify them. Every whisper was louder, every shadow longer. The air in the dormitories grew stifling. Some sisters refused to sleep alone. Others refused to sleep at all. It was no longer possible to tell who was truly afflicted and who had been pulled into the tide by fear alone. Madeleine remained at the center of it, whether by choice or by curse. She said little now, watching instead with an expression no one could read. Some feared she was the devil's bride, others that she was his mouthpiece. And in both cases, the danger was the same. When the abbess could no longer maintain order, she sent for help. But the men who answered the call would not come with comfort. They would come with questions sharp enough to cut, and the power to turn any answer into a weapon. They arrived without warning, black coats against the pale winter sky, their boots crushing the frost beneath them. The royal envoys moved like men on a battlefield, not guests in a house of God. Behind them came the clergy, robes swaying, eyes scanning the convent as if searching for the devil himself in its shadows. From the moment they stepped inside, Louviers no longer belonged to its nuns. The questioning began that same day, not gentle confessions in the quiet of a chapel, but interrogations in cold stone rooms where the air smelled of ink, sweat, and fear. Each sister was summoned in turn, made to kneel and asked to speak, not to God, but to men who measured every tremor in their voice. They asked about dreams, about visions, about the things whispered in the dark. And when the answers did not satisfy them, they pressed harder. Sleep was withheld, meals delayed, prayers interrupted. Some swore they saw instruments of torture carried discreetly into the cloisters. The line between saving souls and breaking them grew thin, and then vanished. Madeleine was called more than once. Sometimes she returned pale and trembling, other times strangely calm, her lips sealed as if locked. Those who tried to comfort her came away shaken, claiming her silence felt heavier than words. The records written by the investigators swelled with accusations. Black masses in the refectory, demons in the dormitories, priests who summoned spirits and bound the living to them. Whether truth or fabrication, it no longer mattered. On parchment, every lie became evidence, and every doubt became guilt. The convent's daily rhythm was gone. Bells no longer marked the hours. The only measure of time was how many more sisters had been taken to the questioning room. And still, the men stayed, moving deeper into the heart of Louviers, pulling at every hidden thread until the whole place began to unravel. When the last of their questions turned to the rites of marriage, not to God, but to the devil, the tone shifted. They were no longer seeking answers. They were building a case. The trial was not held to seek the truth. It was staged to display it, already decided. The great hall was lit with too many candles, their flames bending under the heat, shadows dancing across faces that had come not to listen, but to watch. It was less a court than a theater, and the verdict had been written before the curtain rose. The charges were read aloud in a voice that carried like a sermon: pacts with the devil, unholy rites, desecration of the sacraments, the profanation of marriage itself. Each word was weighted to crush, not to convince. Witnesses stepped forward, some trembling, others too eager, their testimonies rehearsed, polished, and bound to the same conclusion. Madeleine stood among the accused, her habit stark against the dark wood of the dock. She spoke little, and when she did, her words were twisted before they reached the record. The priests who had once guided her were now painted as her conspirators, their names chained to hers in ink that would outlast them both. The devil did not need to be present. His role had been given to flesh and blood. The sentences came in a rush, as if the judges feared hesitation might crack the illusion. Some were condemned to lifelong confinement, others to death. The rest, marked, shamed, and stripped of their vows, were left to carry their guilt like a brand. Outside the hall, the winter air bit at the crowd that had gathered. The verdict spread faster than the cold, carried on lips that needed no prompting. For the people, the matter was settled. Louviers had harbored the devil, and now it had paid the price. But history has a way of holding on to its ghosts, and in the years to come, some would question whether the trial had banished evil or simply hidden it in plain sight. If you want to understand the weight of that shadow, you have to see what became of Louviers after the sentence was passed. The convent did not die with the verdict. It rotted. Its gates closed, not in protection, but in shame. The iron hinges rusting as seasons passed. The gardens grew wild, nettles pushing through the gravel paths where processions once walked. Silence returned to Louviers, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a grave. The sisters who remained were not free. Some were locked in narrow cells, their only company the damp walls and the scrape of their own breathing. Others wandered the cloisters like shadows, lips moving in prayers that no one answered. Food came rarely, light even less. The world outside had forgotten them, or chosen to. Madeleine's name still echoed in the corridors, but no one dared speak it aloud. Those who tried found their voices trembling, as if afraid she might answer. The records say she lived out her years in confinement, her mind unraveling thread by thread. Yet even that was not the end of her presence. Villagers claimed they could see candlelight in the upper windows at night, though no nun had been assigned to those rooms for years. Travelers swore the chapel doors would open just enough for a cold wind to escape, carrying with it the faint scent of burnt incense and something sour beneath. Whatever had haunted Louviers had not left. It had simply changed its shape. The church, eager to seal the wound, ordered the convent abandoned. Furniture was stripped, relics removed, and the altar dismantled stone by stone. Yet no matter what they took away, the walls seemed to hold on to their weight, refusing to let go. In the end, Louviers stood empty, but emptiness can be as dangerous as any crowd. And in that hollow shell, the story of the Devil's Bride would not fade. It would ferment until the day someone dared to speak it again. The story did not end when the doors of Louviers were sealed. It lived on in whispers, passed from priest to priest, from villager to traveler, each retelling bending the truth a little further. The Devil's Bride became less a woman and more a warning, her name a shadow that stretched far beyond the convent walls. Some said Madeleine had been an innocent, trapped in the ambitions of men who needed a monster to burn. Others swore she had invited the darkness willingly, that she had worn her unholy vows like a crown. The truth was buried somewhere between, but no one seemed to want to find it. It was easier, safer, to let the legend stand. Over the years, the story shifted with the needs of the teller. In one version, it was a tale of faith tested and lost. In another, it was a parable about the dangers of temptation. And in the most dangerous telling, it was proof that the devil could walk into holy places and claim them as his own. Fear has many uses, and Louviers had become a well that never ran dry. The ruins themselves seemed to play their part. The wind moved differently there, curling around the empty windows like it carried a voice. Those who dared to step inside claimed to hear footsteps that stopped when they stopped, to feel a gaze that lingered when they turned away. The walls, as always, kept their silence, but silence can speak. And so the tale remained, waiting for the next ear willing to listen, the next tongue willing to repeat it. What began as a single confession had grown into something larger than truth, larger than memory, a shadow that no exorcism could touch. Evil, they said, had been driven from Louviers. But when you strip away the names, the dates, the verdicts, what really changes? The convent that once rang with hymns became a hollow shell. The women who once lived in devotion were reduced to memories, rumors, and footnotes in someone else's record. Faith was meant to save them, but in the end, it was the very thing used to destroy them. Before the madness, Louviers had been a place of order, if not joy, its rituals predictable, its walls steady against the wind. After, it became a scar in the countryside, a warning that the line between sacred and profane can vanish without a sound. What was gained? A story. What was lost? Lives, trust, and a piece of the soul of Normandy. If this story stirred something in you, I invite you to join me here, where the shadows of history still have voices. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with those who seek the darker truths, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your voice helps keep these tales alive. And if you want to walk further into the corridors where royalty and cruelty meet, watch the other stories in the playlist. Royal Blood and Tortures, the dark medieval tales. I'll see you in the next video, where another chapter of the past is waiting.